net zero carbon target, for example. And this resource, I specifically wanted to talk about the RIBA Climate Guide today because it really aims to serve as a crucial resource, helping all of us to navigate through the complexities of these interlinked challenges that we see around the world, and really empowering the sector to lead with purpose. But before I can provide you with an overview of this book, I really would like to briefly introduce myself in addition to the kind introduction that I was given earlier. And I also would like to contextualize this material that I'm presenting today by talking a little bit about the holistic set of topic of the climate framework, which this book is structured around.
Recording in progress.
And I'm a practicing architect and environmental engineer. In my day job, the sustainability director at the global design practice of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And to nurture my passion and to scale my impact, in addition to that, I'm currently wearing multiple hats in various industry-wide and academic organizations so that I can really help accelerate the collective solutions to the challenges of climate change. I've also, as mentioned before, really been privileged enough to be recognized as one of the 100 most influential climate leaders in the world by the Time magazine. And this has given me an opportunity to even raise awareness on this important subject matter across a wider spectrum of audiences, among which you're here today. So I'm really thankful for this opportunity. As I mentioned before, I would like to start by really providing an overview to the Climate Framework Initiative, which the structure and the taxonomy that has emerged from it has the same name, the Climate Framework, because this initiative really has informed the core topics and the overall structure of the RIBA Climate Guide that I'm presenting here. But I want to emphasize that this is not just about talking about the topics that or chapter names that are included within a book, but it's more about creating a universal language around climate change, which I do hope that the RIBA Climate Guide is just a piece of it, and it's used as a tool to help build this knowledge and build this language around the world. So the Climate Framework Initiative was established over 4 years ago as an international transdisciplinary voluntary effort with the aim really to ensure that both direct and indirect impacts of our decisions within the built environment sector are really consciously acknowledged and addressed against the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, which are recognized as the sort of fundamental framework that all of us in all sectors should be working towards, not just within the construction sector. In order to achieve this initiative of climate framework really works to break down the industry's existing silos by cross-pollinating expertise and experiences across the supply and value chains of the built environment sector, and also across a global built environment community that we've been helping to build in the process, because it's essential to establish a common ground and really create a common language around climate change, as I mentioned before, that I believe we so desperately need. And the second aim of this initiative is to really align expectations and create a thread of knowledge weave through from the industry to academia and vice versa, in order to really ensure continuity and consistency in the way knowledge is built, ideally starting in academia, but disseminated and built upon throughout the life of a built environment actor's life, and throughout different stages of a built environment professional. And under the Climate Framework Initiative, therefore, we're bringing generations together, and it's a first of its kind, where generations can share knowledge as well as experiences, while also encouraging a greater unity between the built environment sector and academia. The ultimate aim is really to upskill, reskill, and build our industry's collective capacity for climate action, and to do so in every aspect of its value chain. So even though I'm an architect and environmental engineer, many of you may be coming from an engineering background today. This initiative and this book that I'm presenting today is very much targeted for anyone and everyone whose decision impacts the built environment sector. And in this way, I think now going back to the initiative, because we wanted to ensure that there is a continuity in the way that this language is spoken amongst the youngest generation to the oldest generation possible, who's influencing and impacting the built environment sector. We thought this is the only way we can really close the feedback loops, by really bringing the know-hows of practice into the next generation of the built environment professionals' core education, And also by leveraging the best academic research, we're able to inform the progress and help deliver the innovation construction sector continuously needs. And so how does the climate framework structure and taxonomy look like? I talked a lot about the initiative and the purpose behind it, but let's dive deep a little bit into the first output of this initiative, which is the climate framework structure and taxonomy. As mentioned before, the climate framework contextualizes the UN SDGs within the built environment landscape, and it's specifically focused on the goals that can be directly impacted by the work we deliver across the sector. This doesn't mean that we are not acknowledging the other goals, the 7 out of the 17 that are not necessarily captured within the climate framework initiative, because they are inevitably and indirectly impacted by the work that is being done by the sector. But we said it's important to start somewhere and really start with strong foundations on understanding which goals that we can directly impact with the work that we do today. So those are the goals that have been identified as the core topics to focus on, to build this language and to build this content around. So the climate framework structure is organized around 6 main overarching themes as presented here in bubbles and colors. And these themes, as well as their sub-themes or topics, really aim to cover all disciplines represented across the sector, from interior design to architecture to engineering of any kind, and urban as well as city planning, among others. And the topics that are identified also strategically have been identified in that way so that they can address the impact the built environment professionals' work have at different scales, which is really important, from individual buildings to cities as well as regions. And as we have established this initiative in its early days, we really acknowledge that there needs to be a holistic and interdisciplinary approach that needs to be embedded within the sector, which currently is not consistently existent. And this is why the Climate Framework Initiative took over 2 years in formulating its set of topics and defining its language. What you may find on the presentation I'm giving today, but also if you go on the climateframework.com's website, the language looks very simple, and it is, and it just looks like a set of topics, but I can assure you every letter and every word in that structure has been scrutinized quite heavily by over 1,100 individuals from all around the world, from different backgrounds in academia and industry, and from different levels of expertise, to really be able to define and find this consensus around what the words should be of our new language around climate change. And all of this work has also led to the tremendous support we have received on this initiative to date from more than 170 international organizations, and that is growing. And throughout these years, the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, became the first professional institute in the world to adopt the climate framework structure. And they have defined what they call their own climate literacy mandatory competence requirements, which are currently presented in the knowledge schedule that can be seen here. When we first created as a group of voluntary individuals, and there were 18 of us that have originally drafted this structure and taxonomy of climate framework, our aim was that anyone and everyone, but specifically starting with professional institutes and organizations, because they have the greatest impact and influence in terms of audience, that they adopt this framework and they use it as a blueprint almost, or as a starting point to help inform their climate focus or sustainability focus training programs, curricula, and this is also in academia, and any other education programs that they may be putting out there. And we're very thrilled that RIBA really embraced this on day one and defined their own mandatory competence requirements based on the topics that are created by the climate framework. And following this, commissioned by the RIBA Publishing, the RIBA Climate Guide was consequently created to provide guidance on all of these holistic topics. Because as I said before, even though they may look simple in their language, and that's intentionally done that way so that people can take and slightly interpret it according to the needs of their own constituents and according to their own languages, because an architect's priority and focus area may not be the same as a policymaker's, or may not be the same to a structural engineer's. But we wanted to make sure that everyone has the same level of base level knowledge. I'm not saying that everyone should be experts on all of these topics, but everyone should have base level of knowledge around all of these topics so that when they are collectively sitting around the table, making an important decision about a project or about a new policy that they may be introducing in, or any industry standard that may be coming forward, that they understand the common terminologies of circular economy, nature-based solutions, net zero carbon even. And it was really important that the framework and the structure presented a holistic set of topics, and the topics cater to the needs of both those in academia, both students and those teaching in academia, but also professionals all around the world. And it's therefore important to note that this book is not just for professionals that are practicing in the UK, or not for just architects that are practicing in the UK, but it's all for all built environment professionals whose key decisions really impact the built environment. And the main reason for it is because when we contextualize the climate emergency within the built environment landscape and really aim to create harmony between people and the planet, which is what we always have been talking about in the last few years in the industry, we really realize that there is a profound need for a systemic change across all segments of the built environment's supply and value chains. And this systemic change must occur at all scales, starting with the vast ecosystem of cities, which is the greatest sort of system that exists within our sector. Because cities only cover 3% of the planet's surface, which is very small, but their impact is immense. They are currently responsible for more than 75% of the global annual emissions. And this is a number that is bound to increase in our current ways of living. And as the population inevitably sees a rise towards 2.1 billion people by the mid of the century as it is anticipated, the global building stock will also need to double. And our cities will inevitably demand more than what the planet can naturally offer within its limits. And as we construct and renovate an area equivalent to the entire Greater London every 2 months for the next almost 35 years, and this includes both new build projects and also renovation projects, we really need to deliver solutions that are equitable for every city. And in this journey, buildings play a crucial role, because as many of you have probably heard, they are currently responsible for nearly 40% of the global carbon emissions per year, which is a massive amount. And I think it's, we often talk about addressing climate change is really important for the health and the benefit of the planet. But I think it's also important to understand that it just goes beyond just minimizing our negative impact on the planet, addressing climate change. It's really about embracing, safeguarding our own health for the future. Because the built environment we help rebuild and build and renovate today forecast more than 165% health risk increase by mid of the century. And in many parts around the world, this is an average number, but in many parts around the world, this number is significantly higher. So I'm going to bring back something that many of you have seen quite often over the last few years, but just to iterate that limiting global warming to, if I can even dare to say 1.5, but I'm going to stick with 2 degrees Celsius, which I think we surpassed the 1.5 ambition, unfortunately, which is deemed essential to avert a climate crisis, will be challenging. It will require rapid and far-reaching transitions at an unprecedented rate, and it will really rely on the global economy reaching to net zero carbon by 2050. And that's why I talk about collaboration, not only within our sector, but ideally beyond our sector and with other sectors. But I should emphasize and bring the focus back to the built environment sector and say that even though global economy is trying to reach to net zero carbon by 2050, the built environment sector and the construction sector needs to transition to net zero carbon much sooner. And this is simply because the buildings that we create, that we design even today, they may take up to 10 years before they can be occupied. So that's a very big timeline. And that's why the decisions we're making now needs to be in line with what the requirements, what the needs of our world is going to be in 10 years' time, for example. And it has been highlighted in various reports over the recent years that there are large and persistent knowledge and skills gaps within the global construction sector, currently hampering the sector's collective ability to meet this net zero target by this critical deadline of 2050. And although I think I should acknowledge there is plethora of information within the industry and academia and exemplar sources that really cover similar content to what the RIBA Climate Guide currently offers, but those sources mainly focus on specific topics such as energy and carbon or biodiversity or social value, and they do that often in isolation because they are written by subject matter experts on with a particular focus on that one topic or two topics. And also they don't acknowledge consistently or elaborate on this relationship and as I call interlinkages that exist between different topics when we consider the varying impact areas of climate change under its vast umbrella. And in addition to this, there isn't a single place where all the high-level climate-related knowledge and content in the context of the built environment sector is gathered, which creates confusion in regard to which sources to rely upon or how many different sources to rely upon. And this further really contributes to what we see still today, the overwhelm many individuals feel about this overall subject matter. And it detaches them from wanting to accelerate the work that they're doing, or it detaches them from wanting to really innovate because they're very much overwhelmed with this ambition and lack of perhaps awareness and knowledge. And all of this sort of context and awareness are the reasons why the RIBA Climate Guide was needed and created. This book is designed to become the single source of knowledge, culminating various important research, findings, and recommendations around the world under key themes, where the critical observations are summarized in relation to the UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. And I should pause here and just mention, I'm not a subject matter expert in all of these topics. What I try to humbly do is really try to bring all of the amazing work that is being done by many subject matter experts around the world in academia and in the industry, and really bring them all in a succinct manner with a consistent language and a simple language in one place. Because this book is catered to anyone, as I mentioned before, that may have zero knowledge around climate change in general. And so I do hope that if you get a chance to read this book, you'll find the language easy, and it's just really meant to be a high level awareness raising content. So structured around the climate framework's topics, the RIBA Climate Guide specifically takes its overarching themes to create its 6 main chapters. But before I offer further details of all of these topics, I would like to take this opportunity to really gather insights from you and ask which is the topic or that you heard of or know the most about. And I do hope that you all have access to your phones or a computer. And if you could please either scan the QR code that you see on the screen here, or you can alternatively go to menti.com and enter the code that you see at the top of the screen here, starting with 42. Then you'll be able to rank the topics in the order of the one that you heard the most should be at the top, to the one that you heard the least about, which should be at the bottom. And I will give you a few minutes to fill out this poll. I do this often because I think it's really important to help inform where further knowledge content needs to be created in the areas that there is a consistent lack of awareness.
For those who can't see it clearly, it's 42520098.
Thank you.
(42520098). Mina is not working.
Oh, really? Okay, then I'll continue. It's a shame, but I'll continue. Maybe I can share the code with attendees along with my presentation. If you wouldn't mind submitting your responses at your own time later on, it will really help me selfishly define what topics to focus on in the future editions of the book, and also help sort of share widely across the industry which areas that require further knowledge building. But now if I can perhaps go back and explain how the RIBA Climate Guide is structured, I would like to emphasize the guide starts with 2 introductory chapters. The first of which is the Global Built Environment Climate Fundamentals. And this chapter maps out the essential background knowledge around global research, policies, commitments, and projects that relate to climate change. It then takes that broader knowledge, this is a very high level global knowledge, and makes it relevant to the built environment landscape in the next chapter that I call Sustainable Outcomes and Common Threads. And this chapter covers crucial topics of outcome-based design, retrofit, disaster risk resilience, climate justice and procurement, as well as research, life cycle costing and innovation, among other topics. I thought it was really important to dedicate a chapter for this topic, for these various topics, because they deserve to be highlighted, introduced at the very beginning of the book, but also iterated again throughout different chapters of the book, with a very focused emphasis to the theme that they sit under, the chapter that they sit under. For example, there is a brief introduction to renovation or retrofit that is given here in chapter 2, but then retrofit is briefly discussed again under the subsequent chapters, where, for instance, we talk about how one can retrofit an existing building to enhance people's health and well-being, which is covered in chapter 3. Or how can one retrofit an existing building to achieve a low or zero carbon performance structure or building. And this is discussed in chapter 5, which looks at energy and carbon. And so it was important for me to make sure that these topics are discussed again and again throughout the entire book, because they are such crucial ones. And it wasn't worth doing a separate dedicated chapter for each, because then we would miss the opportunity to identify these interlinkages that exist to this topic to other topics, for lack of a better description. And as mentioned before, at the heart of the RIBA Climate Guide are the 6 overarching themes, which are presented in 6 chapters. These chapters really provide high-level knowledge around the concepts which we must all consider and embrace in order to holistically mitigate the adverse impacts of climate change in our day-to-day work, in our practice. The first one of which is human factors, which covers subjects in relation to people and the impact the built environment has on people's health and well-being, behavior, and lifestyle. It also touches upon the topics of social value, community building, and just transition. And throughout this remaining part of the presentation, you'll see images of projects such as the one you see here, of an amazing project in China, that the book really emphasizes these topics that are theoretically covered with the context of a case study. The next chapter focuses on circular economy, which specifically looks at resources, their use, management, maintenance, and procurement in order to encourage circularity at all aspects of a built environment's life, and really to promote endless recycling and reuse if that's possible. Chapter 5 of the book covers the topics of energy and carbon, and this chapter brings net zero energy and carbon, among other related subjects, to the forefront by providing a clear understanding of what decarbonization means, and also by offering guidance on how to minimize energy use as well as reduce whole life carbon emissions. And it does so through real life case studies, as I mentioned before, similar to all the other main chapters of the book. To give an example, a key case study included within this chapter is the world's first net zero energy school designed by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Located in Staten Island, New York, the Kaplan Grimm School for Sustainability and Leadership, as it is called, really seamlessly marries passive and active design strategies and maximizes on-site renewable energy generation with more than 2,000 photovoltaic panels on the facade, on the south-facing facade, and also on the roof that you can see here. And this considered an innovative approach, especially at the time, which was almost 15 years ago, really has established a new benchmark for all school buildings around the world. And by taking daylight as a key design driver, this 2-story public school incorporates skylights, light shelves, and light-colored reflective surfaces that you can see here on the image to really reduce the building's overall lighting-related energy demand by 80% throughout the entire year, which is quite impressive. And you can see in the image here that that the lights are not on during the daytime, which is ideally we want to achieve in every building if possible. And through engagement with the building's end users from day one with follow-on training sessions, provided all the to all the occupants, during the post-occupancy evaluation phases of the project, the building really continues to secure its initially targeted net zero energy performance almost 18 years ago to this date. Another case study featured in this book is I'm taking you to another part of the world and to a different scale. And the project I want to briefly talk about the Sydney Park Water Reuse Project in Sydney, Australia, which is a project that is covered and talked about in detail in the next chapter of the book called Water. And this chapter focuses on water use, harvesting, and recycling, as well as climate change's impacts on natural water bodies and water availability. The project is designed by Turf Design Studio and Environmental Partnership. It really culminates an interwoven series of infrastructures that enable water reuse, community recreation, and habitat creation, as well as biodiversity enhancement within the largest physical fabric park of Sydney, Australia. And water harvesting and cleansing processes are creatively made visible in this project through the landscape's ebbs and flows, which the visitors can engage with and experience through the pathways, some of which you see here, that really interconnect and intersect with wetlands. In addition, there are waterfalls that celebrate the release of clean water after the treatment process. And the overall park really captures, treats, and stores, as well as circulates stormwater for reuse, both within the park for irrigation purposes, and also in the vicinity area in the nearby nursery, for example, for non-potable demands. And I wanted to, in specific, to highlight these two case studies from the book, really to demonstrate the kind of information you'll be able to find within the RIBA Climate Guide under various topics and also across different chapters of the book. The next chapter covers ecology and biodiversity, which emphasizes the importance of finding a balance between people, built in the natural environment, by focusing on efficient land use, nature-based solutions, and sustainable food production, among other topics. And the last chapter of the RIBA Climate Guide emphasizes connectivity and transport, addressing the urban scale of the built environment and placing importance on how people, places, cities, and regions connect to one another through active travel and other future sustainable means of transport. And I should iterate that this was the hardest chapter for me to write on because there is very limited knowledge in comparison to other topics out there. And the reason why I wanted to conduct the survey, which unfortunately I didn't get a chance to, but hopefully I'll be able to rectify with the new sort of login code that I can share with you later on today, because the survey can provide further insights on what topics that there is limited awareness and knowledge on. And connectivity and transport has been the one, at least in my experience, when I was doing the research for this book over 6-7 months. And there are 5 sub-chapters in each chapter, so the book is entirely very consistently structured because there's a lot of content that is being covered. So I wanted to make sure that the structuring of the chapters and even the way that case studies and illustrations are created, they are very consistent in each chapter and sub-chapter, so that people find it a bit, hopefully, more easy to navigate through this content. And all of these sub-chapters in each chapter really aim to reflect to the breadth and the richness, the depth, as well as the sort of the contextual priorities that each of these topics embrace and really represent. And as we look at all of these topics, interlinked topics together, even though they have been separated in different chapters, there are signpostings made within each chapter to other chapters where there is an important knowledge awareness that needs to be risen. And when we even look at this holistic sort of set of topics that are presented here, we acknowledge the impacts of climate change and the responsibility we carry within the built environment sector really spread quite wide across different aspects which collectively impact people's and the planet health. And some of these impacts are immediate, whereas others may be felt in time. And that's the reason why it's essential for all of us to consider all of these topics in tandem in order to avoid any unintended consequences when designing, constructing, retrofitting, operating, or even occupying a building to be or at low or net zero carbon performance. And net zero, I'm giving that particular example because net zero carbon has been such a tremendous focus in everyone's agenda over the last few years. And also just to sort of summarize here that this is the reason why the RIBA Climate Guide includes all of these overarching topics and organizes the content in the manner it does. And to further support this, each subchapter of the book contains a full-page illustration, very simple diagrammatic illustration with a number of legends that really gives some of the core strategies the built environment professionals can consider in their day-to-day work. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a sort of high-level key strategies that designers and engineers and planners can consider, especially in their work. I think it's important to highlight here that the legend numbering that you see here is not meant to give a priority order to these high-level strategies, but they are purely used to link the illustrations on the left, to diagrams on the left, to the text format of the strategies that are written on the right. And following sort of the illustrations, there is always consistently a case study presented in each subchapter, really to bring some of the heavily referenced theoretical and research-based knowledge of the book into the built environment context by sharing key information and data on implemented real-life projects. And then you'll see in each of the case studies, there's a colorful numbering found at the bottom of each case study, which really ties this case study back to the overall 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which have been identified for the prosperity of our planet and people. And over 100 case studies at different scales and in varied contexts, as well as geographic locations, were examined for this book, among which only those 30 that had reliable published information were selected to be included. I hope that as more data becomes available in built environment projects moving forward, I can include a greater number of diversity of case studies from many parts around the world in the future editions of the book. And if you know any particular case study that you think is worthwhile considering, please reach out to me. I would greatly appreciate it. And the case studies currently represented in the RIBA Climate Guide showcase examples from built environment projects across 26 countries in the world, with supporting reference information from North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, and India, which are the regions that do not currently have any built environment case studies featured in the book. This is simply due to lack of data and published information on projects. As I mentioned before, this book is just a culmination of a summary almost of all this amazing work that is being done by other subject matter experts around the world, and that's why it's heavily referenced. It's in fact considered to be the most heavily referenced book that RIBA Publishing has published to date. The book has 21 pages of references, as well as 46 pages of freely accessible online glossary, where over 460 key concepts and definitions that I have written myself, because it was important for me to bring again content together from various resources around the world, because there are so many different sources that define what net zero carbon is, for example. And it was important to bring them all into this book's appendix to give clarity to some of these key terms and concepts that are being discussed within the book. To conclude, I really would like to thank everyone who's listening today. And I really believe each of us really holds the power to shape a more sustainable and resilient future. And by working together across our sector and even beyond our sector with others, we can really achieve a truly transformative impact. And in this journey, I do hope that RIBA Climate Guide becomes more than just a resource for you. Should you wish to engage with it, read it, share it, because I see it as a catalyst to raise awareness, to shift mindsets, and most importantly, to drive lasting changes in behaviors and practices with sustainability at the core. And I do hope that this guide can inform every decision and action that you're making, and helping us collectively recognize and act on the interlinkages that exist across different priority areas of energy, infrastructure, biodiversity, and social equity, among others that I mentioned before. And I do hope, lastly, that this is a way for us to move forward in true harmony. I'll be more than happy to help answer any questions you may have, but thank you so much for listening and for inviting me to this important event.
Thank you, Mina, for a very wonderful presentation. Taking any questions from the room and online. Sure.
Hi, Mina. Very nice presentation, and I understand that you have done tremendous work into that book. Congratulations for that. I wanted to ask you, all the case studies that you present in the book, I understand that they mostly from places that enjoy 4 seasons. Unfortunately, here in Trinidad, we are in the tropics, so we have dry season and wet season. And the temperature usually is between 30 and 36, 38 degrees year long. So by implementing solutions like low-E glass, for example, that you can prevent this, but these systems are kind of expensive. So are there other ways that we can implement here in the tropics to lower the carbon footprint of our buildings in an economical way?
I'm not sure if anyone is raising questions, but I cannot hear anyone.
Hi, Mina. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
I can
right.
hear
We,
you.
we were
Thank you.
using the Roman microphone, but it seems that that's probably not connected to the Zoom. So a question was raised by Savas, where he said that in the tropics we have very hot weather and very wet weather. And he said because of the high temperatures, high UV radiation and high infrared, temperatures seem to be a big problem. So are there any suggestions for how we can keep our carbon footprint low whilst modifying windows, or what can we do to reduce solar radiation and infrared?
I think this is a great question, and there's a lot to unpack here, but maybe just in essence of time, I can just say that, and this is going to sound very straightforward, but it really is very straightforward, is to really prioritize passive design measures that I think we often have forgotten in the years with the evolution of industry and sort of emergence of new technological equipment and advancements of technology. I think we've forgotten how far along simple shading device can go, sort of shading the facades, shading the outdoor areas without relying on heavily relying, I think it will be inevitable, but heavily relying on air conditioning. One can truly minimize the impact of solar gains or infrared radiation on, at least onto people and the way both inside and outside, and the way that the buildings operate. I think it's reliance on nature, sort of vegetation and sort of shading elements, both outside and sort of on the exterior facade of the building can go really a long way. I hope that can help answer the question. It's a very straightforward one, but it really is one that makes the most difference.
So passive shading. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mina? Yes.
What I'm going to say is, how can we participate? For instance, I have a project. No, I don't.
Okay.
I have a project that could use some passive shading, right? How could we collaborate from down here to add to the case studies?
Okay.
What are the
What criteria do you need to submit?
benchmarks for participation?
Okay, sure. One of our participants here said that there's a project that they're doing in Trinidad that has a lot of passive shading. No?
That's perfect. Yeah. Can I include that as a case study?
That's exactly what he was asking. What sort of benchmark does he need to submit to you to collaborate as a benchmark for projects?
What I can do is that there is, so the main benchmark is that it really needs to be, I think when I was, there isn't a clear benchmark or very definitive one because I want to be as inclusive as possible to really demonstrate wonderful work that is being done by many others across the world. But when I can maybe just humbly share what I was looking for when I was doing the research, and I did over 6 months of research also trying to find which case studies to include within the book, is that I was really trying to find ones that have ideally have been built so that what they had aspired at design stage have become a reality, sort of trying to create that thread from design stage to construction completion and operation was an important aspect of it. And majority of the projects, apart from two, they're all constructed projects in the book that I've included, and that it really demonstrates, and it doesn't need to be an extremely expensive project or a project that has a lot of technology elements included. It can be as simple as a purely passive design focused and very almost primitive, and I say that in a nice way, focused design project, as long as it can really demonstrate through the performance that it had anticipated has become a reality at design stage, has become a reality at construction completion. And then it will have numbers. I think the data is what I wanted to emphasize, because there are a lot of individuals around the world that claim to sort of deliver truly sustainable buildings, but then the numbers often speak for themselves. When I say numbers, the performance metrics of energy use, water use, increased daylighting or reduced cost. And these are sort of the key performance indicators are the ones that can really truly demonstrate and provide the evidence needed to believe that that project is an exemplar in its kind. And I think as long as it has some metrics from that perspective that can be shared, then I'll be more than happy to include that in the next edition of the book and greatly appreciate it.
Okay, great. Yes, Mina will share some information here and we'll have some discussions. And is it okay if I share your contact with?
Please do.
Okay, great.
Please do. And also in the copy of the presentation I've shared with you, there is an additional slide which has links to the Climate Framework Initiative. It has links to to a survey where if anyone is interested in providing a case study project, they can fill out that survey so I can only gather information. So it's an easier way of gathering the content and helping address the questions that the audience may have after today's session.
Excellent, thank you. And there's one more question.
Yeah, should Mina's the chair of the Construction Industry Council? Could you give a couple of sentences just so that we understand
Okay.
professional institutions are actually collaborating?
Okay, sure. You're asked to give a couple sentences or a little brief summary of the work that you're doing as a chair of the Construction Industry Council, please.
I'm really happy to do that. I just started, so my role is quite new. I think our aim is to really, and even though I'm the chair, it's a collective effort. There are amazing sort of leaders across the UK professional institutes and institutions that are part of this climate change committee of the UK Construction Industry Council, which I'm chairing. And our aim is really to unite the industry even greater to, I think, the priority areas. Even though I haven't yet shared this with the committee, we've done a series of workshops to understand what priority areas are going to be for us in my new term. And there are sort of three key areas that have come up from the conversations. One is really ensuring that we can collectively help build the industry's capacity. So very much focus on knowledge sharing and knowledge building, training and education programs. The second sort of key area is lobbying the government on sort of making the requirements on energy and carbon performance at the least much more stringent, and including embodied carbon emissions as part of the building regulations. There has been a wonderful work that has been done by Will Arnold at ISTRAC-T and others to champion this. And then thirdly is really to leverage what's existing in the industry, for example, and maybe some individuals today will talk about the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, but there are many other efforts that are being led by others outside of this committee, but linked to this committee in the industry. So we want to make sure that we can support them and have them amplify the messages that they're trying to deliver. So I do hope that in my term of the next few years, with the support of the various representatives from the UK construction industry, that we'll be able to deliver on upscaling, lobbying the government for more stringent regulations, and also supporting UK net zero carbon building standards specifically, among other initiatives.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mina. Thank you so much. Fantastic presentation. We appreciate you being able to join us online.